And welcome back. Today we have a very special episode and a start of a brand new 5-part series. We're going to be talking about the brackets, the good, the bad, and the ugly. I'm Levi.
I'm Jacoby.
And I'm Joe.
And this is the Thought Vessel. Welcome to the show. As I said, we're going to be talking about the brackets, the good, the bad, and the ugly. This is going to be a 5-part series. We're going to be starting out today with bracket 1, ending with bracket 5, going in chronological order or numerical order. But of course, we are all avid Magic the Gathering fans. We are all Commander fans, but we are not resident experts in any particular bracket. We're going to be bringing people on as our experts here along the way as needed.
Speak for yourself, Philistine.
Oh, the Dunning-Kruger effect in action right there. But it's all good.
Also, chronological order?
Or numerical. See what I have to put up with. Of course, I'm bringing out a special guest today. We have Heartwood joining us on the show today. Thank you so much for being able to attend.
Thank you so much for having me. It's an honor.
A little bit of background for everybody. We actually met at MagicCon Atlanta with my wife. That was the first time she had been to any convention at all, let alone a Magic the Gathering convention. We wanted to get some games in, and we were able to play with Heartwood in a bracket 1 game there. And then we had a chance to meet and connect. And I knew at some point down the line we were going to be doing a bracket 1 video, so I definitely wanted to get them involved. We'll talk about that game a little bit later on, but let's just starting out here. Why don't we give the listeners a little bit of your background, what you're about, and why you're on the show here today?
I'm Heartwood Storyteller, Heartwood for short. I started playing Magic in high school, learned at Boy Scout camp while I was working there, learned Commander in a senior year of high school. My first Commander deck, to give the temperature of the room, was Chorus of the Conclave because I thought they were incredible. And I was disabused of the notion that that deck was actually good. But I just wanted green, white, pretty things. That was the whole thesis of the deck. I've been doing bracket 1 for a long time. I've played in every bracket, but when Wizards actually came out with the bracket system, I saw bracket 1 and I was like, oh, that describes me. That describes how I play. Finally, there's specific dedicated space for this. From there, I started adapting all of my decks to what they described as bracket 1, which basically meant pulling out all the game changers and shifting my entire focus as a deck builder to this dedicated space for the kind of Magic I already like to play. Now I have 5 going on 7 bracket 1 decks that I have gotten way more enjoyment out of playing than any other time in my Magic playing career. It's not really a career.
Having that many decks certainly allows you to bring them and allow people to borrow them to see what a actual big deal about bracket 1 might be.
And now I have a full pod. Whenever I go to any of these Magic Cons or any sort of Magic event, I bring a full pod of bracket 1 decks so that people can say, I've never played a bracket 1 deck. I don't have a bracket 1 deck, which is a problem I think we'll get to later. Well, aren't you lucky? I have 5 to choose from. Probably at Vegas this year. I would like to have 6. The 7th one is taking me a while because the cards are hard to find, but I will have a whole menu of decks to select. How do you want to experience your bracket 1 with different deck design philosophies and play experiences?
That actually brings me to my next question. How is the card difficulty or expense look for some of the bracket 1 stuff you build? Is it a lot cheaper, a lot easier? Is it more niche, therefore more expensive on a lot of cards? What's that kind of look like?
It depends. That's one of the biggest problems with bracket 1 is a lot of it will be, it depends. You can build a bracket 1 out of bulk. And that is one of the approaches to bracket 1 is saying, I have these cards. I'm going to put them all into a deck. It's a cheaper theme, financially cheaper, built around a theme or a set that I really enjoyed. Or the sky is the limit as far as card quality you can purchase for your bracket 1 decks.
Basically, it's focusing on just the different kinds of planes that you enjoy instead of any overarching vague theme like hashtag pretty people.
Except it can be either. I built a deck that's a Queen Marchesa deck that's a meditation on the aesthetic of opulence in Magic the Gathering as presented through that color combination. And it's all featuring art that depicts wealth or depicts the aesthetic of abundance. One of the big problems with Bracket 1 is there's no right way of playing Bracket 1. With Bracket 5, you have everything It's a data-driven format or sub-format, I suppose. You have a metagame, you have all of these statistics about how these decks perform. You have all these ways of quantifying. And that's one of the values of Bracket 5 is quantification. In Bracket 1, we don't have that. We have the opposite, which is qualification. We have to make qualified decisions and choices in our deck building because qualification is so subjective. Bracket 1 is really a space where you can practice whatever kind of deck building philosophy you like, as long as it is in the spirit of thematic exhibition.
That's where I kind of wanted to start opening up the conversational here a little bit. We want to do a little bit of a compare and contrast from the power level based on the bracket system, going over the revolution of establishing Bracket 1 as what it is today versus what it was before. The original power level system that we had in place prior to Wizards of the Coast taking over and then the bracket system being implemented was strictly based on how strong something is versus individual cards being highlighted or the experience or what is good or bad from an appropriateness level at a specific bracket or power level at that point. Let me go ahead and read off what would be considered would be Bracket 1 now, which was basically power levels 1 and 2. Power level 2 was, what's a win con? If decks have a strategy, they'll probably be dependent on their commander being in play at all times to simply function. Any win not achieved by grindy combat would be likely through a convoluted, fragile combo. While land bases may be more cohesive, expect a glut of ETB lands that trap choices like Temple of the False God. Below that is unfocused, random pile of cards. The deck conforms to color identity and card limit rules. That's it. A lot of random mana-intensive cards, no effect or redundancy, no concerns for working mana curve, an overabundance of ETB bad utility lands, and no actual ramp. Expect the first several turns to be land pass. Wins are incidental and result of a long, grindy combat. Reading that out, that's if we looked at Bracket 1 from an explicit, we're trying to fight against a CEDH deck. That's the only thing that it mattered about it. Now it's more, and I'll go off of the most recent bracket beta update that we have as far as the definition. Bracket 1 was exhibition. Players expect decks prioritize goal, theme, or idea over power. Rules around card commander legality to be flexible if all players agree. Win conditions to be highly thematic or substandard. Gameplay to be opportunity to show off their creations. To play at least 9 turns before anyone wins or loses. And of course, there's restrictions by theme of no game changers, mass land denial, extra turns, or 2-card combos, with asterisks towards game changers, extra turns, and 2-card combos for if it were to match a theme and is covered in Rule 0. If I were to give the long and short of it, because I've done a lot of looking at Bracket 1 from the outside looking in, just from various articles and scripts that I've had to write as of late, is I refer to it as, instead of looking at it from a gameplay perspective, as I look at it as the concept of art. It is very hard to put a definition of what art is, but we have art majors in college. We have people who are artists professionally. We know what it is, but it's harder to define. What someone might find as an absolute masterpiece, someone might just see as a bunch of spatterings on a wall, even though it's done by Pablo Picasso.
What's the stupid painting doing in my room? Breaks over a knee. Not the Mona Lisa.
Absolutely is subjective. And guess what? You could have art be anything. Recently, people found out that apparently Banksy is just like this 55-year-old guy living in the English countryside. Yeah, he started his work in the 1990s. What did you expect? That the passage of time doesn't come for us all? Even with me, you could see in the background here, I have Butternut Squash is a master of mental manipulation. The cat with the laser beams. Art is, in fact, subjective, and that's definitely a good way to put Bracket 1.
If we didn't know, Joe has ADHD.
What is so interesting about that, I'm glad you brought up art, is because we do have ways of qualifying art and we do have ways of organizing art. We have terms to describe that through the art world, through things like museum studies. One thing that I did when I really started looking at Bracket 1 is, what if instead of a deck builder, instead of creating an optimized deck, what I'm doing is an active curation? That led me to comparing a game of Magic to a game of Bracket 1, where all the decks are Bracket 1, but assuming 4 players, though it could be more, it's Bracket 1, who cares, is the assumption that the game is a museum and each deck is a gallery. You go back and forth between each gallery. Each card within each gallery is a piece of art hanging in that gallery. I actually have a deck that is a joke on that concept. That's my Promicon deck. If your deck is a museum, what do you need? walls. I call that deck Der Hang zum Gesamtkunstwerk.
Gesundheit.
Reference to a Harald Ziesman gallery showing in the 80s of the same name, which is basically translated to English towards the idea of the total work of art. Gesamtkunstwerk, if you ignore the Wagnerian roots, basically just indicates the total work of art. I walked into building that deck with the idea that I am building a deck that is moving towards being a complete artistic decision. Curating and recognizing that I'm not part of the creation of any of the art, but I can curate the deck in such a way where it's showing off art from Magic's history.
I believe that entire explanation just brought up our podcast a whole echelon because there were so many interesting and highbrow concepts of art in that explanation.
Yeah.
We are all at least one IQ point higher now. It's great.
You have become cultured.
I appreciate my boost to my intelligence score. I shall now become better wizard.
Bracket 1 is a very fascinating concept because we're at the point where we're looking at more from a philosophy of sharing each other's museums, kind of to circle back to your analogy or metaphor there. It's almost like a rejection or rebellion against what Magic conventionally was. Prior to Commander, it was a very grindy, very aggressive tournament style of play that some people would do kitchen table if they weren't going for a particular format. And then that kind of spun off into Commander. And then from there, it kind of spun off to Bracket 1, the celebration of cards and card design and things you can do with this game that has a million different cards at this point. With that being said, we've gone over some of the positives. What is your favorite part of Bracket 1?
My favorite part of Bracket 1 is part of the responsibility of playing a Bracket 1 deck that is core to the bracket. The idea that, yes, am I bringing a deck that I want to show you? Am I bringing a show and tell situation? Yes, but I am also creating opportunities for other people to show off their deck. I am accelerating the entire board. I am making it possible. Every single one of my Bracket 1 blue decks runs a copy of Show and Tell because it immediately makes it possible for everyone to participate in the active exhibition of the decks we put together. What I love about Bracket 1 is it's almost not about playing the game. It's about achieving a heightened sense of group play. There's a ludologist by the name of Bernard de Koven who wrote a book called The Infinite Playground, which I highly recommend reading. Presents this idea of co-liberation, literally group liberation through acts of play. That is the gameplay goal of Bracket 1, is this idea of we are all liberated through playing this format. With other brackets, there is a winner. There are 3 losers. That is a reality. With Bracket 1, it's not really about winning and losing. One of the first blog posts I wrote was called Winning Isn't Playing, because they can't exist simultaneously. Winning functionally ends the act of playing. What Bracket 1 is concerned with primarily is play. Personally, as a player, I like playing Magic more than I like winning Magic. I don't get the same sort of satisfaction from winning as I do from playing. I love that Bracket 1 is a space where I can play without feeling pressured to advance the game to a state of winning it.
That does bring up a question that I have personally not come up with a good answer for when I try to play in the lower brackets. I think out of the people here, I tend to be one of the people who builds really lower power. Joe being exclusively capable and willing to build bracket 1s, and me passively building typically at best a bracket 2 until I decide to refine it. Bracket 2 is kind of where my decks tend to sit. And when I play with a lot of people, one of the issues I come across is that people are so used to staples being a part of everything they do. If a deck doesn't have staples, what is it doing, et cetera, et cetera. In the Bracket 1 area where you have someone doing more staples than theme, and they try to justify it with, well, the deck still has to function. What is the kind of conversation you have with that person? How do you approach that?
I think that's an interesting question. I will give a very good example. Fetch lands. I have no issue with fetch lands in Bracket 1 at all. I run them in my Bracket 1 decks. But land is easy to build into a theme because it's so fundamental to the game and we have to have it. I don't mind seeing a bracket 1 deck with an optimized land base. And I use the term optimized carefully because it's not about strategic optimization, it's optimization towards exhibition. As long as you are optimizing your deck towards exhibition, towards thematic cohesion, towards this idea of I'm here to play and I'm here to show what I've brought to the table through the act of play, instead of saying it still has to function as a deck, because what that assumes is strategic optimization. It still has to function as if I were playing towards the goal of winning. But without the goal of winning, why are you optimizing it towards that goal? That is the way that you would talk a player who says something like that into the idea of, oh, this isn't the goal of the bracket.
Yeah, and I typically only have used the specific basic fetch lands, your Terramorphic Expanse and it's not Explosive Vegetation.
Evolving Wilds?
Evolving Wilds, thank you. Typically only really use those because even within the decks that I've built, I've viewed the lands as part of the exhibition. But with that, how is your framing of lands and building decks a part of that?
What I will do a lot of is omit certain lands. One of my favorite decks to play, my Círdan deck, is Lord of the Rings. There are some fetch lands that make less sense in Lord of the Rings than others. There are some lands, and it killed me to do it, but the Surveil land, Hedge Maze, makes no sense in a Lord of the Rings themed deck. And though I love Hedge Maze and all the Surveil lands, there are lands that they printed with Lord of the Rings themed to Lord of the Rings that do work better. But at the same time, there are standardized lands like Scalding Tarn or Flooded Strand that do really fit into a Lord of the Rings setting. You could make an argument for, while you would have a much more difficult argument doing Hedge Maze or Misty Rainforest because it's really not a rainforest environment in Middle Earth. What I will do is incomplete sets of fetch lands, not run every fetch land that could go get a color of something in this deck. The thing with fetch lands and shock lands and whatever cycles of lands you want to build with, you don't have to use the whole cycle. Even Breeding Pool doesn't make a whole lot of sense in Middle Earth unless you wanted to make a very convoluted argument about Saruman's later use of the Caverns of Orthanc. If you can't qualify a decision you make with the land base as it relates to the theme, then you probably don't need that land.
As a add-on to that with a different question, this is another one I try to figure out an answer for. I haven't quite yet. I'd love your 2 cents. For instances in which you are very heavily proxy friendly, where does the bridge between thematic is fine and we twisted the theme of the art on a card to match what's going on? Just like in your example, Steam Vents not making too much sense, right? Or Breeding Pool not being too much sense. And then someone using proxies as a means to make it make sense. Where do you think we should draw the line on that in the proxy space? I'm super proxy friendly. You should be encouraged to let your creativity flow, and proxies should be fair. But there is a line that should be drawn. Okay, we're kind of really pushing this to match what we're talking about. How would you go about that?
I am hesitant personally, as I am not a monolith. I am not the only bracket 1 deck builder. I am very hesitant to draw any sort of line as pertains to the way that people interpret bracket 1. I know that sounds like a cop-out answer, but what it is it's really in the interest of I want as many people to play bracket 1 as possible. In order to make that happen, making the umbrella as big as possible, cover as much as possible, would create as much opportunity for that as possible. Now, if you are proxying and transforming the art of game changers, of extra turn spells, of mass land denial, then it's probably a different conversation. One of the other things I really like about bracket 1 is when someone is pub stomping bracket 1, it's really, really, really obvious because the deck moves so much faster than everyone else. When people are playing things like counter spells don't show up very often in bracket 1, or if they do, they are very thematic. If someone's running a bunch of counter spells, you kind of have to start asking the question of in what way does that help people exhibit? What is your goal here? Is your goal here to allow exhibition to take place, or is it to win the game? The way to ask the question of where do we draw the line in bracket one is to say, how does this help the entire group experience co-liberation? Are you getting in the way of that? If you want to participate in that, because there's a lot of people who don't really want to participate in co-liberation, and that's fine. There's 4 other brackets for you to choose from for those of you who don't want to do that. But if you want to do that, but you don't know how, that is a problem with a solution. And we can adjust and curate your deck, and I can go through a deck and say, hey, I don't think this is really helping exhibition, and I think there are better options that will help everyone do it. It's really a conversation with that person. What was your goal here? How can we move towards centering exhibition more?
We'll take that as a jumping off point and shift into the bad. Let me circle back to our bracket 1 games back in MagicCon Atlanta with my wife. I built her 1 or 2 decks. She's still very, very new into playing Commander. And most of the people we play with are going to be pre-con battles bracket 2. Very straightforward, laid back experience. We went up to set up for bracket 2, and you got paired with us, even though you had actively said that you were wanting to do bracket 1. We had a bit of a split bracket environment or game. Granted, Sarah really loved the low pressure experience of it, had a wonderful time. We played a couple games, it was good, but it was very much, there was bracket 1 decks and bracket 2 decks kind of running along simultaneously. Sarah's not particularly at the point where she can pick up a deck that she doesn't know very well. She's just not at that level of Magic knowledge. But we're at a point where you were at a MagicCon, which is thousands of Magic players. 80% at least have decks on them at any given time. We were having a hard time getting a pot of 4 bracket 1 players together on a consistent basis.
The struggle here is that we have hit a point in Magic the Gathering, and this is a little bit a deviation, but I'm going to come back. We have so much redundancy in what we can do in Magic with all of the cards that come out. People go from enjoying a theme to, yeah, I can stuff 4 or 5 versions of a doubling effect into this deck that lets me do the thing. It's run the taste out of a lot of expedition style gameplay for a lot of people, because it's really, really easy to just go, yeah, I can add this, and this doubler, and now the deck functions. It's not as difficult to make a token deck function flawlessly as it used to be when we only had 2 token doublers and they were both green. Now we have 7 and they're across 3 colors.
This was, in fact, just a common problem with all of the brackets, is that there are just that many kind of things.
It's bridging off a little bit. It's deviating slightly, but we're going to bring it back. For the course of Expedition for bracket 1 and such.
Expedition?
Do you mean exhibition?
Sorry, that one. I'm dyslexic.
Freudian slip.
Apologies, your words coming out of your mouth were obviously caused by how you could read.
Yeah. But where I'm going, for the purposes of gameplay, how do we convince people on a regular scale as we go out into the world? It's less about the fact that they just don't exist and more about how do we draw people into it. I want to find ways to not have to include those things. And when people bring it up, I don't want to be negative, but also I kind of want to look at them and be like, hey, maybe don't just snap add this, and this because they're good. How do I go about this?
We have a couple different questions going on at one time. The question about power level, and I think there's a question about mixed bracket. There is a way of answering both at the same time. I don't mind games of mixed bracket because I understand that people don't understand what bracket 1 is. One of the big problems with evaluating bracket 1 is that the entire bracket system is evaluated using bracket 5's terminology. Talking about quantification as a deck building ideal is so rife throughout the game. I'll use your example, token doublers. Yes, there are a bunch of different token doublers. I run a few in a couple different decks, but that redundancy is not producing the same effect that it does for bracket 5, or insofar as you run token doublers in bracket 5, that it does in bracket 1. Bracket 1 as a reality is not able to be evaluated using bracket 5's terminology. It's so phenomenologically, ludologically different, which is the study of games. Ludologically, it's so different from bracket 5 that it doesn't really exist within the same calculation. The bracket system is not a system for discussing power level exclusively. That's part of the bracket system, but it's also about deck building philosophy. My deck building philosophy, operating primarily within a bracket 1 space, is that everyone has more fun when everyone plays. That philosophy as a bracket 1 deck builder is compatible with all of the other brackets, except perhaps for bracket 5, where you are so isolated and atomized as an individual deck that you want to execute a win without interruption. Mixed bracket games are fine for bracket 1 most of the time. If you're running a bracket 1 in a bracket 4 pod, yeah, you're going to run into problems because they're probably not interested in your values as a deck builder and as a Magic player.
They also typically want to win on turn 3, like CDH, just a little bit out of tournament.
Yeah. The answer really is we need to figure out a way of describing what bracket 1 does. That's really my goal as a writer, as a player, as a person within the Magic community. Provide more tools for people to talk about bracket 1 so that they can evaluate it separate from bracket 5, so they can take the power conversation out of the evaluating what a bracket 1 deck does or how we build one or how we play one.
I do want to circle back and dive in a little bit deeper on your statement saying that we are evaluating all of the other brackets based on bracket 5. We went over that, but I would like to get a little bit more examples and dive in on that a little bit.
What is interesting to me about the bracket system, if you look at the bottom of the bracket system, you actually see that it's actually a bracket spectrum. It's a bracket spectrum between, I think their wording is socially focused decks and metagame focused decks. Socially focused decks being on bracket 1 and metagame focused decks being bracket 5. What is interesting in ludology, we have a bunch of different other spectra that we can describe. I kind of previewed one that I talked about, which was the difference between quantification and qualification. Qualification exists primarily in bracket 1. Quantification is emblematic of bracket 5. There's a few others. I brought up the idea of Gesamtkunstwerk, which is the total work of art. That's an idea that occupies bracket 1. Whereas on the other side, you have strategic optimization. I don't have a better word for that right now that is quite as evocative as Gesamtkunstwerk in bracket 5. I think another way of describing it, if you will allow me to paraphrase Nietzsche in The Birth of Tragedy, is to describe bracket 5 as Apollonian and bracket 1 is Dionysiac, which is the two poles that Nietzsche uses to describe what tragedy does as a theatrical mode of entertainment. You have the Apollonian, which is very structured and very rules-oriented, trying to make the art cohesive through the idea of rigidity and through the ideal of working towards beauty as a mode of perfection. And then you have the Dionysiac, which is embracing a intoxicated chaos in the art that creates conflict, that creates the opportunity for evolution and growth. By that definition, one could say that bracket 1 is Dionysiac and bracket 5 is Apollonian. To give an example, because it's a spectrum, bracket 3 is really in the middle. Bracket 3 is not really doing its job at the moment of being the perfect balance between these ideas. We're evaluating bracket 3 using bracket 5's terminology, not any of the terminology that could exist for bracket 1. Even bracket 2, which I have played, which I enjoy, should have some elements of bracket 5's terminology, but should mostly be centered in a imagined or theorized terminology that surrounds bracket 1. I'm trying personally to create a lot of different perspectives on what is that bracket 1 terminology. Part of the nebulous problem of bracket 1 is that it's really hard to describe. Again, there are a lot of different deck builders with a lot of different ideas about bracket 1. Everyone should be included. What is more useful than saying, here is the one vision of what bracket 1 can be like we have in bracket 5? What we can say is, here are a number of different philosophies that you could take into deck building and take into play that are underneath an umbrella of bracket 1. until we have more people subscribe to the idea of different deck building philosophies existing under bracket one and putting those into practice, we are going to have games of mixed bracket just because we don't have as much people paying attention to what's going on in bracket one.
At least a more banal way of doing that kind of comparison is kind of comparing Call of Duty or League of Legends to essentially a Telltale game. Basically, the whole point of League of Legends and Call of Duty is winning at all costs versus Telltale trying to tell a story with your input at least a little bit.
Another really good comparison would be comparing Settlers of Catan to Candyland.
I like that. I like that a lot.
Settlers of Catan is you're trying very specifically to build the longest road or have the longest army, and you're trying to optimize your materials in so much as possible, relying on dice rolls. Meanwhile, with Candyland, you're just rolling the dice to see how fast you can get to the Candy Castle through the licorice swamp. It's two very different approaches, but they are both games, and they are both opportunities for play, and it's just how you want to play.
Wood for sheep? Wood for sheep? Or wood for 2 red blocks?
I will not give you my blocks. I know what you're doing with them, Joe.
Yeah, trying to win Candyland.
For bracket one, in the place of other formats, such as Arch Enemy and for Plains Chase editions, do you feel bracket one is cohesive to those ideas, or kind of just bracket one is bracket one?
Those alternative game experiments, there are a few other examples. Explorers of Ixalan is a very good example. Murders at Karlov Manor Clue Edition is a good example. All of the Commander Party variants, House on Silent Hill thing from Duskmorn, Bloomborough Seasons, all of that naturally finds a home in bracket one.
Love it.
Talked about the good, we talked about the bad, getting into the ugly. I'll just kind of give what I perceive as the ugly side of bracket one, which is a problem that is going to be eventually resolved. We're still in kind of the infancy with the implementation of the bracket system and what it's capable of doing. To put it in a blunt term, it is a very, very weird format. My hot take, or less of a hot take, has always been that it is the hardest bracket to build for, because in CDH, you can go online and find deck lists. There's a lot of staples and cohesively put together what you're trying to do.
Put together a deck in 45 minutes?
Yeah.
I mean, speak for yourself. I'm able to build a deck in 2 hours. It's in fact how I got the question, how's your neurodivergency going?
You know, it's really sad. I don't think I've spent longer than an hour and a half building any deck I own.
How's that neurodivergency going?
With bracket one, it requires uses of card search engines and a very deep understanding of the game, or at least what paintings are available in the museum to add to your collection. Being able to take a game that's designed in a particular way and using those parts to put together your art piece. It's hard to do. With the exception of maybe some of the more chaotic builds where it's just trying to unravel the game as much as possible in bracket one, it's very beginner friendly to play. It's not very beginner friendly to try to brew and put together. The lack of popularity as it stands right now, it's harder to get the footing, because if we can't get full pods together, we're not getting the genuine experience as often, and it's harder to come to more of a cohesive understanding of the bracket and then also evolving from there.
I'm going on 4 months with one of these decks that I'm building just because of card availability, because I'm trying to find Theros foil commons.
Oh, you're cooked.
It's a whole thing. But that deck building project also is taking time because I want every card in that to be a story spotlight, quote unquote, for a fan fiction that I would like to write, telling the story of Kianos and Tiro and how they met and how they defeated, I can't remember the name of the Archon, undermining my whole Vorthos thing. But that's one of the deck building philosophies. That is by far the hardest. The answer to the question is what we can do, or eventually we'll be able to do, and will help bring more players into bracket one, is eventually we will be able to evaluate each of the deck building philosophies under the umbrella of bracket one to say, here is the easiest to approach. Here is a deck building philosophy that's relatively straightforward, and here is one that is not. And be able to say, if you want to get into bracket one, build a deck that centers this deck building philosophy, and then build this one, and then build this one, and then build this one, and then build this one. basically create more or less a course, more or less a guide to building bracket one by taking its least complicated deck building philosophy and guiding a deck builder through to its more complicated deck building philosophies. That's a way of overcoming that problem. We're not there yet. We're not even to the point where we've defined enough philosophies to create some sort of ladder. But that would be a very good solution to the problem you're describing.
Basically, just using some of the themes that at least Wizards has said. Stuff like a starting philosophy of everybody's in a chair, but then moving it further and further to some of the decks that I've made, such as Delicious in Dungeon and Free Reign. It's a little bit harder, and you have to think about it a little bit more, make very specific choices getting to those kinds of themes.
Well, yes. The easiest kind of bracket one deck to build is a typal deck. Gavin used the example of Oops All Horses. That is a relatively easy Scryfall search. You just say type line horse, and you build a deck based on that. Yeah, is there a complicated reality with having to go look up cards that include horses in the art? Yes. Scryfall has something that I think needs to be developed a little bit more called Lore Finder, which does help. But it also helps to be able to look at other bracket one decks on something like Moxfield or Architect and say, what have other people done with a theme that I might want to do? That probably is the easiest theme to approach in bracket one. But I want to emphasize the fact that I think there are a lot of other deck building philosophies in bracket one, and that is not an exhaustive list. I presented 4 or 5 different approaches to building a bracket one deck. But I don't think that's exhaustive, and I don't think that's a complete list.
Just a tweak on what I think you were going with the typal, because I'm pretty sure it is the underserved types and not well-established and very catered to types.
Yeah, don't build Elf Ball in bracket one.
Stannis Helpers.
No! Get out of here!
Build Homerids.
Yeah.
I once made a very, very joke deck. It's very bracket one, where it was Jellyfish typal. But every creature in the deck besides its commander was a copy of Amoeboid Changeling.
My favorite Praetor.
I know, right? And that's actually probably even easier than typal to build is the meme deck. Build the meme deck. There's a lot to work with even the meme deck. Obviously, that is not a legal commander deck. Obviously, that is a very silly deck that does not fulfill the goals of building a commander deck. It was expensive, unfortunately, because Amoeboid Changeling is not exactly the cheapest card anymore. And of course, I wanted foil copies. Eventually, I pulled myself out of my TCG player shopping cart of a bunch of foil Amoeboid Changelings, and it was like, wait, what am I doing? That deck never actually made it to paper, unfortunately. All this to say, there's a lot of deck building space in bracket one, and that there's really no limit to how creative you can get with it.
I love your Seto Kaiba approach of screw the rules, I have money. That's a great little homage.
But that's how bracket one is sometimes. If you want to do the thing that Wizards does every Pride, the deck building challenge of 2 partners that don't have partner, if you want to bring that deck to bracket one, it's probably fine. No one's going to really bat an eye. You want to bring an uncommander like the Grand Calculatron or Alexander Clamington to bracket one, that's fine. You want to put a planeswalker that doesn't have this planeswalker can be a commander into your command zone and say, hey, this is a bracket one deck built around Comet Stellar Pup. I have no problem with that. Bracket one is really a good place where we can bend the rules about what commander even can be.
I will say that you did just give me an idea for bracket one, which is just Hamilton, but it's all fish.
Oh, absolutely. I think that's a great idea. I think you should build that.
Let's go ahead and wrap things up here. Thank you so much for coming onto the show, Heartwood, and kind of explaining bracket one for our listeners to have a little bit more context as we're going with the good and the bad and the ugly. We will put your blog that you write in the show notes if you want to check out some of the articles that they're putting together. Also, we could add your Moxfield.
Yeah, for sure. And my Blue Sky.
We'll put all that in the comments. So if you wanted to follow along or just see some of these bracket one decks in totality and kind of get a feel for it, that will be available to do so.
I will say for my Moxfield, I do publicly publish decks I am currently working on. You will see incomplete decks that are in progress as far as this is what I'm working on next. This is what I'm trying to put together. I love the comment feature on Moxfield, and I wish it was used more. And if you're willing to come on Moxfield and comment on my decks, I invite that. That's awesome.
Any final comments before we go?
If I have one thing to say in conclusion, Your Honor, it would be to either build a bracket one deck, just have one. And you might only play it once in a while, and that's fine. And if you don't know how to build a bracket one deck, find someone like me, find someone in the community, and there's a few of us who know how to build bracket one. Joe is a good example, or Jacoby, or any of us. Find us and talk to us. Reach out. We're pretty available. If someone slides into my DMs and says, hey, I want to build a bracket one deck, can you help? Absolutely, I can help you with that. That's one thing that bracket one needs to be, is a little bit more proactive about including people. I have to admit that I am a little disappointed every time I go to a MagicCon. The first MagicCon where we had the bracket system was, I think, Las Vegas. Or maybe it was Chicago. Did we have it in Chicago?
I think it was Chicago.
Okay. I wasn't at Chicago, but I was at the Vegas one after Chicago. I was told by the command zone that I was the only person who came up and asked for bracket one the entire weekend. I am a little tired of that being our reality. If I could put out a challenge, MagicCon Las Vegas is coming up in a couple weeks. That is plenty of time to build a bracket one deck. It should be plenty of time to build a bracket one deck. I am 4 months in on one of them. But if you want to build a bracket one deck and you're heading to that event, reach out and I will do everything I can to help you within reason. I would love to see way more bracket one at MagicCon, at these other events. I want to see what you've got. Show me what you got. The more people showing what they've got, the more bracket one becomes bracket fun.
The gauntlet has been thrown, and when this episode comes out, you will in fact only have a month to build your decks. Do it. Build your bracket one deck.
Best of luck with all that. Thank you so much for coming on. I definitely want to end it there. I've been Levi.
I'm Jacoby.
And I'm Joe.
And I'm Heartwood.
And this has been the Thought Vessel. Have a good rest of your day. Goodbye.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Now, this might be a little bit above brow, but this is an excellent bracket one deck.
Delectable. Really makes you think.
And 3 out of 10.
Is it your Kenrith Elf Typal Santa's Helper bracket one? Is that what we're talking about?
Shut your face.